In this video, we're going to be talking about how you can gain CAS status in the UK as a mortgage broker. And I've got 5 steps in which you can follow to be able to do that. So let's get into it. Number 1 is going to be about finding the right network and finding the job, which we know is going to be the hardest thing to do because more often than not, people want experience. But how can you get experience when all you've got is examinations? The difficulty is you go and get your CEMAP, you go and get your CII, but they don't teach you how to do the job. The exams today are the same exams that I did in 2003. And the big problem is it doesn't teach you the process. It doesn't give you the knowledge. It doesn't show you the skills and the attributes and the communication and the rapport building. Equally, the forms, the research, the tools, the methods that you can use in order to be able to help you to give advice and to move closer to gaining CAS. So in solving this first step, sometimes as a means to get in the industry, you might want to consider being a mortgage administrator. You might be able to gain a role as a protection advisor in which you don't actually need to have any CEMAP or CII qualifications under the regulations. Some firms may still require it. But if you can get into a firm as an employee, that's going to give you day-to-day guidance and support, moving you closer to getting CAS. And what is CAS is probably a good question to answer. Competent advisor status. It's basically saying that taking a client from A to Z in relation to the advice that you are giving. So they come to you saying, I have this need, you recommend a product, you fill in all the applications, you make your recommendation. The FCA are looking, the Financial Conduct Authority are looking to make sure that the A matches the Z. And once you've done that enough times, you're then given competent advisor status, usually after 6 to 8 file checks, depending on the network and depending on the individual training competency scheme. For me personally, it takes a lot more than that and it takes a lot longer than that, because when you take into account first-time buyers, moving home, debt consolidation, serviced accommodation, buy-to-let, commercial if you're going down that route, bridging, development, you know, there's so many different pieces to the puzzle, remortgaging, product transfers. How can you be competent in all of those? If you've just done 8 files, but they're 8 different files with 8 different scenarios, that doesn't make you competent. So I think a big thing to realize is you need to feel confident within yourself, and you need to make sure that you have actually done enough to feel confident in one particular area and one particular scenario. Focus on first-time buyers, get good at them. Focus on remortgages, get good at them. You might be competent at first-time buyers, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be competent at buy-to-let. So although the networks and the employers may have these minimum standards, make sure that you feel competent within yourself. In terms of networks, there are some that take on trainees and will support you to gaining CAS. The main thing to make sure that you have is consistent support. The job is hard. It's nothing like the exams. And there's so many pieces to the puzzle and so many parts and components that you need to understand, which you need to make sure, and I'll be going through them in the following steps. You need to make sure that you understand all of those different elements so that you can get to competent advisor status. So number 1, find a good network and find a good employer. So point number 2 is fact-finding your clients, but not just that, it's understanding the first conversation that you have with your clients where you will open that fact-find. It's going through the form, the data capture as I like to call it, knowing the relevant information that you need to ask. Sometimes a fact-find is seen as just a form-filling exercise. I actually see it as a sales tool and a sales opportunity. They call it KYC, know your client. A fact-find is a means to know your client and understand who they are, but also their aspirations today, their aspirations in the future. And once you've collated all that information and you've got a better picture of who they are, where they are now versus where they want to be, you can then request the most relevant documents in order to be able to move one step closer to giving them the advice that they need. Now, more often than not, when you're starting out, I did this too. You do a full 30 minutes to an hour with every single customer, because it's in that practice and in that repetition that you gain more confidence and you get better understanding of the questions that you should be asking. The form is there to guide you, but 9 times out of 10 when you speak to lenders, once you come off of the phone and you move on to the next step, you're going to have to find that there's going to be questions that you should have asked in the outset. And you only learn that through experience, through dealing with different customers and different clients. So first appointment, fact find, ask for documentation, and then knowing what to look for within that documentation to match all of that information to the lender's criteria to be able to give them the right advice. So it takes time, and you need to understand that every client scenario is different. If you imagine, I always talk about it being a puzzle. Every piece of the puzzle can potentially be different. And you could have 2 clients in exactly the same scenario that have almost the same fact find, but there'll be one piece of that puzzle that makes it completely different that can throw that case out. So the more fact finds you do, the better you're going to get, the more competent you're going to feel, and the closer you're going to get to the status that you want to have. So point number 3 is about the research and the quotation phase. Once you've done your fact finding, you've got all your documentation in, it's then a case of actually going ahead and researching the lender. Now, depending on which employer or which network you're with, I would definitely say that you want to have somebody check your fact find after you've actually been through it to help you, to give you the feedback. And this is where training and management really is needed and can support you to get to CAS much, much quicker. But once you've got all the documentation in and you open up Knowledge Bank, Criteria Hub, the tools that help you to understand the criteria quicker, faster, help you know which lenders to approach first. TryGold, Mortgage Brain, 27 Tech, they're going to contain all the different interest rates and options that are available to each individual client. But prior to that, using Knowledge Bank and using Criteria Hub is going to give you the option to narrow those lenders down. Now, from an advice point of view, it's vital, and it's also now an FCA guideline, although I've been doing this for years, that you recommend the most cost-effective mortgage to the client during their fixed discount tracker deal period, because that's the most effective judgment as to what's the best and most cost-effective scenario for them to have. But once they come to an end of that, you need to make sure that your advice is relative to their circumstances. Whether you're recommending a fixed rate, a repayment mortgage, discounted rate, tracker rate, overpayment as an option, no ERCs, no early repayment charges, all of that stuff needs to be taken into account. And once you've done that, it's then also vital that you have that checked before you give it to the client. And that's a vital step that we use within my mortgage brokerage. Even with new advisors who have got competent advisor status elsewhere, we make sure that the advice is to our standard, because we as a firm and as a principal of that firm need to make sure that the advice they're giving on behalf of our firm is accurate, and we don't want bad habits from anywhere else. And this happens when you change networks over the years. And it's why I think it's vital that you want to minimize your changing of networks, minimize changing of firms. If you've got it good where you are, it's pointless trying to chase another 5% commission, another 10% commission. Look at the deal that you're getting from them. Look at how they're supporting you. Look at how they're helping you to develop and improve and grow. And actually you may find that they're quite cost effective and valuable. So once you've done your research, once you know which lender you're using, document as much information as possible. If you're not using the cheapest on the list on the research tools like TryGold and Mortgage Brain, then make sure that you're justifying why you're not going with the top one and what the reasons are behind it, because that's about your advice. The fourth thing is around your AIPs, your applications and your suitability letters. Because if your managers turn around and said, yeah, number 3 is all good, your advice is good, you can give that to the client, and the client said, hey, yeah, you're happy to go ahead. You've then got to take that fact find information, take the information from their documentation and put it into the decision in principle, follow it through to the application, and then summarize it all with a suitability letter. Every firm has a different name for this kind of thing. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that your pay slips, if they're employed, match the bank statements. You need to make sure that the income that they're paying themselves according to their SA 302s or accounts as a self-employed individual matches what's going into their personal bank. It's your job as the advisor to ensure that. It is the lender's responsibility to check the income and the expenditure, but it's your job as the advisor to make sure that the mortgage is affordable and that you're giving them the correct advice, which you can only do by getting the documentation early in the process. We don't give any advice, we don't give any lenders, we don't give any interest rates until we've had all the documentation in. And then once we've done the AIP, the application, and summarized our suitability letter, before that goes to a client, we then get it checked by the operations manager to make sure that the advice is solid and sound. And at that stage, that's when the application is submitted. There's still things that could change after that. And I'm a big advocate within our firm, particularly as majority of our business is done over the phone. We send a full electronic signature with a copy of the fact find, a copy of the research, a copy of the illustration, a copy of the application that's been submitted to the lender, and a copy of the suitability letter, as well as a couple of other declarations to the client to get them to electronically sign it. Now, I always say to my mentees, of which I've got nearly 200, at the end of the day, if even your network doesn't require that, I want to do it for my own circumstances because it's me who's giving the advice. And if, for example, you're underneath a network and the network don't require it, but there's a problem with the advice that you've given further down the line, if the client signed it electronically, even if the network don't require it, it's about covering your backside, not anybody else's. And that's the whole purpose of this entire job. It's about making sure that in 10, 15, 20 years time, your advice still stacks up. And then last but by no means least is that number 5. It's about that final file check right at the end of the process. Because as I mentioned, when you submit the application to the lender, there's still things that could change. Maybe something crops up on a credit search that you weren't aware of, and it happens occasionally. Maybe if it's self-employed, the lender reduces the amount of income that they're willing to use. Maybe the property's downvalued. So the advice that you've given in the application and in the suitability letter then is subject to change. Because if it's downvalued, then that's going to impact on the mortgage amount that they're getting. I've had it before where clients actually come back after the application's been submitted and want to borrow a little bit more money. They don't want to put as much deposit in because they want to hold some money back moving home to improve. And all of a sudden, you've got to do your research again. You've got to make sure that the product's the right product, that things haven't changed. You've got to make sure that you do another addendum suitability letter to make sure that the secondary time around, everything still matches and it still fits affordability, because that's the big thing. It's about fitting affordability. So the A is the first conversation that you have with the client. The Z at the end of the process is when they've actually collected the keys to the house. And you need to make sure that the story from beginning to end matches. So after the application's submitted, we use a file note to track almost any changes, any conversations, any additional documentation to tell that story to make sure that everything's covered. And networks, employers will all have their different ways of doing it. But when you understand the complexity of the job that you're embarking on, it's not easy. It doesn't get competent overnight. Just because you can go and do an examination and sit a 5 or 10 day course and get the exams at the end of it, much like passing your driving test, it takes years of practice, years of knowledge, years of different clients and different scenarios to gain true competence. And to be honest, I don't think you're ever truly competent because criteria changes all the time. So I hope that helps, and I hope that gives you some indication as to how you can gain CAS status. Yes, a network or an employer might require you to do 5 fully competent files where everything matches from the first conversation through to the pre-application submission and the advice, through to the suitability letter, through to the end of the process, the A to Z completely matching, but make sure that you feel confident inside here. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like and leave a comment, but also go and subscribe and turn it on to get notifications of the next video. And also, I have a free Facebook group over on Facebook, funnily enough, which is the newly CEMAP qualified community. Make sure you come and check it out, come and join, and look forward to seeing us on the next video.